Ultimately, becoming a successful investor is about making optimal decisions. And more than raw intelligence, what factors into our ability to make the optimal decision when we need to make it are any biases that we may have. So the less biases we have, the more objective our thinking is, and the better our decisions are. So it's important for us to understand what biases the human mind has a tendency to fall into so that we can recognize them when they occur in us and when they occur in others, so that we can be aware when they happen and we can adjust our thinking and our decision making accordingly. In this video, I'd like to go over some of these most common biases that have been found in humans in general and investors in particular that hinder our ability to make the optimal decision when we need to make it. So without further ado, let's get started. Assalamu alaikum, my name is Rakan Kayali and welcome to Practical Islamic Finance, where we try to understand financial matters and build wealth in a way that is in line with Islamic principles. If you need halal funding and you live in the United States, go to fundmebff.com. If you earn more than $200,000 annually and you'd like to make a halal investment with your money, then go to fundmebff.com as well and apply to become an investor. All right, let's get started. The first bias in our list is belief perseverance bias, and that is the tendency of people to hold on to originally held beliefs, even in light of new evidence which discredits their original belief. Just because a certain belief predates another belief doesn't mean that it holds any more merit. Belief perseverance bias is closely related to something called cognitive dissonance, which refers to the discomfort that people feel when they are faced with new information that discredits previously held beliefs. So in order for people to avoid this cognitive dissonance, in order for people to avoid this discomfort, people resort to selective exposure, selective perception, and selective retention. So they don't expose themselves to information that may challenge their beliefs. So everyone watches the news channel that basically says what they want to hear. They don't retain information that challenges their beliefs. So it's in one ear and out the other. And selective perception, so they don't even see things that they don't want to see. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to this in the generous Quran when He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, أَفَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَتَكُونَ لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ يَعْقِلُونَ بِهَا أَوْ آذَانٌ يَسْمَعُونَ بِهَا فَإِنَّهَا لَا تَعْمَى الْأَبْصَارُ وَلَكِنْ تَعْمَى الْقُلُوبَ الَّتِي فِي الصُّدُورِ. Have they not walked through the earth and have hearts that they can reason with and ears that they can hear with? Indeed, it is not the eyes that go blind, but the hearts in the chests. So even though you may not be physically blind, it is perfectly possible that you are blind to that which you don't want to see in order to avoid that discomfort that comes with it. When it comes to investing, it's important to always ask ourselves, have I fully appreciated the counter arguments? Am I only exposing myself to arguments that support my thesis? Am I undervaluing pieces of information that conflict with my theory? As an example, if I think Uber is a good long-term investment, do I still think Uber is a good investment in light of the advancements in self-driving? Do I know what its new business model is going to be in case self-driving becomes popular? Will its business model still be viable after self-driving comes out, if it ever had a viable business model? So whether it's buying a particular stock or starting a new business or investing in a new technology, always ask yourself, have I fully processed and understood and accounted for any new information that may conflict with my previously held belief? To counteract the effects of belief perseverance bias, it's important to actively seek out any information that may challenge your beliefs. Now, it's important here to mention that you shouldn't overdo it. Do your homework. Seek out information that challenges your beliefs. Keep an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out. The second type of bias to be aware of is something called representative bias. Representative bias can happen in a number of different ways. The example I want to focus on is when one sees a sample of something and confuses it for a representation of the entire population. So you get a few pieces of information and you think that this represents the entire picture. So for example, if you tuned into the nightly news on any given day, you would think that the world is falling apart and everything is going to hell in a handbasket. However, you would be forgetting that the job of the news is basically to answer the question, what is the worst thing that happened in the world today? And they don't report on all of the positive developments and happenings that happen every single day. As it relates to investments, people are often quick to panic and quick to get really hype about something after just a few headlines on the topic. In order to be a successful investor, it's imperative for you to keep a level head at all times and not confuse a sample of information for an accurate representation of the entire picture. The third bias is the illusion of control bias, and that happens when people think they control something when in fact they do not. So for example, there's a famous study where people were found to be willing to pay more for a lottery ticket in which they were able to choose the numbers for when compared to a lottery ticket that they weren't able to choose the numbers for and the numbers were randomly generated for them. When in fact, both lottery tickets had exactly the same chances of winning. If you work for a company, for instance, you may think that you have control over the performance of that company, and therefore if you invested a disproportionately large amount of your wealth in that company, that would be okay because after all you can control the outcome of your investment. When in fact it may be the case, and often is, that the performance of any company or any investment is reliant on a slew of factors that the employee in the company may have no control over whatsoever. And in the case that the company does poorly and the investment does poorly, the person may be saddled with a huge loss, and in addition, depending on how poorly the company is doing, they may lose their job as well. So it's important as an investor to understand that ultimately investing is about choosing between different probabilities. It's not about choosing between different certainties. When you understand that investing is an exercise in choosing between probabilities, you understand that really anything can happen. There are no certainties, and you should diversify your investments accordingly. The fourth bias I'd like to share with you is hindsight bias. And it's basically when people tend to see past events as being more obvious and more predictable ahead of time than they actually were. And this often causes people to reflect on poorly reasoned decisions that had favorable outcomes as being genius, and on the other hand, well thought out decisions that had not so favorable outcomes as being foolish or unwise. As we mentioned earlier, your job as an investor is to choose the courses of action that have the highest probability of success. What the outcome of your investment ends up being is often outside of your control. So it's very possible for a wise decision to have an unfavorable outcome. And it's very possible for an unwise decision to have a favorable outcome. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have $10,000 in savings, and you know that you're going to need this $10,000 in savings over the next 3 months. You're 100% sure of it. Now, you're examining Apple stock, and you place the probability of 80% of Apple stock going up by 30% over the next 3 months, just as an example. And there's a 20% chance that it actually loses 30% over the next 3 months. Because you know that for sure you're going to need your savings, you decide not to invest because you can't afford the 20% chance that it loses 30% of its value. Now, assume the 3 months go by and what you predicted, the 80% chance, actually materializes and Apple goes up in value by 30%. Should you say that your decision not to invest in Apple 3 months earlier was unwise because you could have been 30% richer had you invested? No. You made the wise decision by not investing because you knew that there was a possibility of loss, and you cannot afford that possibility. Just because that possibility didn't materialize doesn't mean your decision was wrong. And had you invested and had your investment appreciated in value, your decision to invest would have still been unwise because you knew that there was a possibility of loss and you invested anyway, even though you couldn't afford that loss. Hindsight bias causes people to look back and say, oh, you knew that Apple was going to go up. Why didn't you invest? You could have been 30% richer. But in fact, at the time, you were 80% sure. And so you made the wise decision at the time. So it's important to overcome hindsight bias, to write down your reasoning when you make a particular investment choice. And this way you can avoid having bias evaluations of your past performance and coming out with the wrong conclusions. So those were the 4 biases that I wanted to share with you in this video: belief perseverance bias, representation bias, illusion of control, and hindsight bias. There are obviously other biases. Perhaps I'll talk about them in another video. As a fun activity, you may want to write these biases down and then count how many times each of these biases are committed in an interview with a politician, especially dictators. It's really astounding how many of these biases they fall into in a 30-minute interview. You can play bias bingo while you're watching an interview, and I'm sure it'll be rather entertaining. Now, to summarize some of the things that investors can do to counteract the effect of biases: number 1, make sure you're actively seeking information that challenges your beliefs. Number 2, make sure that you're well diversified. Number 3, understand that investing is ultimately an exercise in choosing between different probabilities rather than certainties. And number 4, make sure you're writing down the rationale for any major investment decisions that you make in order to avoid hindsight bias and make sure that you are coming out with the right lessons learned from your investment experiences. I hope you found this video beneficial. If you did, leave a like. If I've earned your subscription, thank you. As I mentioned, this channel is devoted to understanding financial matters and building wealth in a way that is in line with Islamic principles. Until next time, take care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum and peace be upon you all.